I initially saw medicine as a violent erosion of my identity. I just remember feeling absolutely consumed by medicine and the degree and the ideals and the perceptions that I now had thrust on me.
Hi, I'm Jordan, and welcome to Stories and Scrubs, a space that validates the medical student experience, facilitates thoughtful reflection, and encourages the development of emotional intelligence. In this episode, I speak to Lumi, a final year medical student, about personal and professional identity, and we explore whether they can coexist. Hi, thanks for coming on the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. My name is Lumi. I am a final year medical student from King's College London.
And what story would you like to share?
This was a reflection of a day that I had on placement. This was my psychiatry placement in my third year, and it was when I was shadowing the on site liaison psych team. And this is in South London, so King's has hospitals mainly in South London. So, background of the patient, she was a young black female, black presenting female, and she was reviewed with a complex history of substance abuse and personality disorder. And what I noticed during the consultation was that some of the patient's concerns weren't met, or sometimes they were just half answered, or sometimes just pushed away. And I remember feeling during the time, I mean, I was a new student on placement anyways, but I was just observing what was going on. And I remember feeling, is this quite right? Is this the way things work in liaison psych? Seeing as I'd been on community psych and they have longer consultation times. So I just thought that and went on. After this, I escorted her back to the wards. And on the way back, she confided in me and started telling me more about her symptoms. And I think initially we just started talking about something completely unrelated to why she was in hospital. It was probably to do with hair. She must have said, I like your hair. And I said, I like hers. It was just that moment of like recognition and like connection. And then she went on to tell me other details about what she was experiencing. At the time, I didn't know what those symptoms were, but looking back on it now, she was describing delirium tremens, which is really important to pick up, and that wasn't picked up during the consultation that we had with the liaison psych team. So I relayed this back to the team with her consent, and they confirmed, like, yeah, they weren't aware of those details, and no one had spoken to them about that. And I guess my key takeaway from that point on was reflecting on how different like black people receive healthcare, even mental health care in the UK, and the disproportionate diagnoses of black people receiving mental health care that has stigma behind them, or they have higher and harder sections despite making up such a small percentage of the population. So I guess it just kept on reminding me throughout the years of the importance of who I am, my identity, representation, and like my unique perspective that I can bring to like delivering quality care to patients.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I can definitely um I can relate in the sense that there have been instances for me where I've spoken with patients and they've felt able to tell me things that they haven't told the doctors. And yeah, it's great that you were able to pick up on the extra symptoms and then feed that back to the team and have that impact as a medical student. I was just curious to know whether you think that your identity influenced that patient interaction, and if so, how it influenced it.
Yeah, definitely. I think like first going off of your point when you mentioned, stuff that makes a good medical student, I definitely think that there are things that medical students are amazing at, which is getting those extra bits of information that form that holistic picture a lot of the time. And yeah, I think that's actually just like a unique quality that we tend to have. It's not just me, like I've seen so many other of my like peers and like they have the same experience as well. I think in this particular situation, you're right to like highlight the fact that my identity did have a role to play, because literally the first part of that conversation was her complimenting my hair. And I think at the time I either had braids in or something very like identifiable as a black hairstyle. And she also had braids in. So that was the first part of us building that rapport. She said, "I really like your hair." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I did it myself." And she responded, "Oh, that's really lovely." And I said, "I like your hair too." And then she, carried on talking about hairstyles. And then she said, "Actually, do you know what? This is something that's been bothering me." So I think even when we practice like history taking skills and consultations, and I know at King's we have like a GP day where we go to the RCGP and we literally just practice these communication skills with all the time that we have available to us. I remember learning that the key to like a really good consultation is that initial connection and building that rapport. And I guess for me, I always try to find some piece of identity that we both share, both in me and both in the patient. In this occasion, it was that we were both young black females, and she felt that, yeah, this is someone that looks like me, and this is someone that I can trust.
Yeah, I think the communication skills, but also, as you say, being able to relate to patients in a certain way and being able to connect with them and see them as not just medical questions or, tick boxes or patients that have this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, so they have this diagnosis, but trying to
Mm.
see patients as a whole and treat them as a human who's in a vulnerable place with um, some kind of medical ailment. You were talking about how because you were able to connect with this patient about your hair, you were able to tease out the other symptoms and get the diagnosis and ultimately prevent harm coming to the patient from them um, not having the condition treated. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was this idea of an ideal doctor and the I guess the pressure that exists within medicine to act a certain way, to look a certain way, to project a certain image on patients and on the community. And I was just curious, first of all, whether you felt there was a single ideal doctor that there is a pressure to become.
I think in some ways, yes. I think it's not like blatantly advertised, but I think it's subliminally encouraged. And I think that's probably due to, there was an ideal kind of doctor that's permeated through the years and the way that, generations before us were taught. And I think there is some residual of that now, but I think our generation just keeps changing and like generations after just keep changing. And, several schemes keep changing the face of medicine basically. So I think it's evolving and it's changing, but I do think that there's still that understated image that we're not pressured to become, but slightly hinted at to become, which is kind of like a doctor that has little to no personality, a doctor that doesn't have a strong stance on anything that could influence a patient interaction outside of the clinical. So I guess in my example, talking about hairstyles with a patient would not be what the ideal doctor would do, because where is the space for that? But I think it's changing. I think because it's an understated or an ideal that's hinted at, I feel like people are more and more trying to challenge that in their own way. And I guess I initially started off trying to fit into that ideal, but then I just thought to myself, why am I doing that? So I changed, and I think it was for the better. Yeah.
I do definitely think that things are moving towards there being more a wider range of identities that people bring into medicine. I think there are definitely it varies in terms of how explicit it is, but there are certainly pressures to act a certain way and
Mm,
to, as I was saying, to look a certain way and behave a certain way. I think that it also kind of ties into what you were saying earlier about considering patients individually. And I think for me, part of the pressure to become this kind of ideal doctor is related to the fact that in medical education there are a lot of stereotypical patients, and you can probably reel a few off in your head, but the kind of um, the conditions where every question we see seems to be the same type of patient and they always present in the same way. And sometimes I know that I've done it as well, especially if you're revising for exams, you're doing multiple choice questions and you're trying to get through them as quickly as possible. Sometimes
mm,
you know what the diagnosis is before you've even read any of the symptoms because the questions are all written so similarly that you know
yeah.
that a patient of a certain age from a certain ethnicity with a certain job, they're in the question, they're going to have a certain condition. But obviously, once you get onto the wards and you meet patients and you have these interactions, you realise that that's not the case. And I think that for me kind of feeds into this idea of the ideal doctor. Um, I think part of it is also the fact that there are so many of us within medicine. I think medical education is individualized to a degree, but
Mm.
a there has to be a way to teach lots of us at the same time and make sure that we all are up to standard. And I think as a result of that, we do sometimes become homogenized in that we're all treated the same and the same things are expected of each of us. And I think that can also lead to the pressure of if we're all if the same things are being expected of all of us, then we all become the same person in a sense.
That's definitely something that I think about a lot when it comes to OSCEs, particularly. Even within my friendship group, this is something that we always talk about. And we talk about this with, staff and like the academics, um, like inkings. And honestly, I don't even know what could change. OSCEs are supposedly objective, but we're all so different. And like you mentioned, like we are individuals, but then we're taught a certain way and we have to meet a certain standard. And to what extent does that standard allow for individuality? That is the big question. So I know I mentioned how like my identity is like important to me in like navigating conversations with patients. But to be honest, even when it comes to OSCEs, I will still tone myself down, which is, I mean, to explain what toning myself down is, it's making myself more palatable to like the main demographic of patient. So making myself as close to what a white male doctor would be. I would never wear a skirt to an OSCE. I have never worn a skirt to an OSCE. I've worn skirts many times on clinical placements. No issues there. I also would not wear my hair like this. I wore a weave for my final year OSCEs and I passed. So at least, I don't know, is that a measure of did it work, did it not? Who knows? But I remember my friend showed up to our final year OSCEs and she is very like fashionable. We love like experimenting with our personality and style and combining it with what a clinical outfit would look like. And she looked really nice on this day, but I had to approach her and sit her down and say, we think this is objective, but to be quite frank, we have examiners that don't necessarily follow the mark schemes are extremely vague and generic. There's a massive part of the mark scheme which is like, does this student seem professional to you? If that particular examiner does not think, like if they don't think a skirt is professional, you will be getting marked down for that professionalism. And it's all down to their discretion. There isn't like a tick box or a check box that goes over all of the like nuances. If you wore a badge, say like on your lanyards, I have loads of badges on my lanyards. I know lots of people have badges on their lanyards. But if there's something that links to your identity and that doesn't agree with the examiner, you can actually be marked down for it. And I think that massive discrepancy in the discretion of the examiners, I think that needs to be visited when we're trying to design OSCEs, no matter how much we strive to make them more objective. There's a reason why certain demographics tend to fail OSCEs, or even after you go past OSCEs into like further training, there's a reason why certain demographics tend to be marked down or delayed a year. And I think that's definitely something we as a collective should look at. But, I think people are looking at it. I think hopefully something comes out of it. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's a I think that's another dimension to what feeds into this idea of being an ideal doctor. I think I think OSCEs and practical exams, there is a lot of pressure, even more so than being on placement or when we eventually become doctors on the wards. As I say, there's so much pressure to, you know, make sure that you're dressed professionally and you speak a certain way. And when it comes to OSCE results for me, so I recently had a meeting with my personal tutor to go through the feedback. I I very rarely look at the percentage score that I get because it is so subjective. And I think I think the percentage score doesn't really tell you a whole lot about how good of a doctor you are. It just tells you what the scores were that the examiners on that day gave you. And
Yeah.
so yeah, when I was in the meeting with my personal tutor recently, I was focused more on the patient feedback, and all the patients said they would be happy to have me as a doctor in the future, so that was good. And I took less notice of the things that were more subjective from the examiner's part. I thought it was really interesting that you said about this idea of toning down. And one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about, based on your reflection, was this idea of your personal versus your professional identity. And I think you've already answered it to a degree with the example that you gave in OSCE exams. But first of all, do you ever feel that your professional identity within medicine has eroded your personal identity outside of medicine? And if so, how do you feel that it's been eroded?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I initially saw medicine as a violent erosion of my identity. I remember in my first year, and then that was post into COVID as well. I just remember feeling absolutely consumed by medicine and the degree and the ideals and the perceptions that I now had thrust on me. And before medicine, I was a girl who liked science and I was a girl who liked art. And I've completely lost every other part of myself that was not science based. And I started to resent that initially. Going into clinical placement as well, even like the most minute details, it's like dressing up. What do I wear to placement? I don't dress like the typical person, so I want to have some of my personal identity linked to my professional outfit. And that's taken me years to actually navigate and figure out. But it's gotten to a point now that I'm kind of comfortable with it. I think at this stage, I now see it as an extension of myself as opposed to something that's like eroding away at my personality. So I guess you could say like I came to terms with it or I accepted it. But really, what I did was I found ways to make my personal identity work in medicine. And I think there's certainly a way that everyone can do it for sure. For me, um, I know that I've got other qualities that are associated with being a doctor. So, like being empathetic, being resilient, literally in my personal life, like I'm always pushing myself to do something or the other. So these are like qualities that we already have. These are qualities that they judge us on anyways to get accepted into medical school. So I started to see it as I'm just exercising these qualities in a different manner and I still have myself in other parts of my life. So yeah, I think there's something to say about not resenting the doctor image of yourself and just accepting it as like an extension of who you are, like a Chrome extension of who you are that you can turn on and turn off. And I guess that's the way I've navigated it. Um, I just turn on a different type of myself when I'm on the wards in a clinical area. And then outside of that, I turn it off and I'm still myself, but just a different, slightly different version. And I think everyone does this, regardless of what profession you're in, even if you're in a 9 to 5, there's a different type of, personality that you're going to have at work as opposed to a personality that you're going to have with your family and friends.
Yeah, you mentioned that you resented that you lost part of yourself when you started medicine. I think I think it was definitely the same for me, where I came into medicine because I was interested in science, but not just biology. I was also quite interested in physics and maths, and I had interests outside of that. Like I mean, I still am interested in music, but I used to play lots of instruments, and I think I think when you're first starting in medicine, it is a bit of a leap of faith because there's suddenly such a workload for one thing, and there's so much pressure, and it's a really, for me, it was a very formative few years, my early years in medicine. And I think because there's just so much going on within medicine, it can feel like there's not time or energy to do things outside of medicine. And I think so. We're both in our final year now, about to become doctors in starting in like less than 2 months. And you
Yeah.
definitely, for me at least, going through medicine, the more that time went on, the more I found my feet and realized that there are things outside of medicine that I'm still able to do. And it's obviously a balance, but as time goes on and you become more comfortable within medicine, I would say it's not as new, and you know kind of you feel more comfortable within medicine. Then there's more time, and there's more, it feels like you have more energy to give to things outside of just medicine. I thought it was interesting how you were talking about for the exams and being on wards and things, you talked about dressing up. And I think for me early on, it definitely felt like I was putting on a costume and role playing being a doctor rather
Yeah.
than this is who I am and I'm going on the ward and I belong here.
How did you navigate that? Because I mean, I thought the boys had it easy. I was always so jealous because I wish the boys' outfits could fit me the way it fits them. That would make my life so much easier. I'm really jealous of male clinical outfits. They just look so great, in my opinion. But yeah, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, initially I didn't really feel comfortable wearing kind of smart formal clothes all the time. Like I'm the first person in my family to go to university. It felt like a very unusual space to be in. I
Mm.
think like you, I felt like I'd lost touch with my identity that I had before I came into medicine a little bit, because I was going in, I was putting on this costume, and it did feel like I was role playing as somebody else. I think as time's gone on, it almost feels like I've grown into the costume, and I feel more. comfortable being in the role of a medic and being a medical student and a doctor and being on the wards dressed formally. I
Yeah.
also wanted to touch on this idea you were talking about, almost a symbiotic relationship between your medical self and your self outside of medicine. Um, and I think that, again, for me, I've definitely, as as I was saying early on, it kind of feels like medicine consumes you and you don't have space for anything else. And then you start to realize that you do have space for other things, and I don't want to see you put medicine into a box, because it still has an influence on every aspect of your life, and it's still the main thing that you do. When I think of my identity at the moment, I think of myself first as a medic, and then kind of all the other things are attached to that. I just wanted to come back to the idea of professionalism, and I think we were talking quite negatively about the idea that you're you're expected to act professionally and the way that it impacts your identity and things like that. I think there are obviously patient interactions where they do benefit from a more professional approach. And I think you just have to take it case by case. And there might be patients where you share a part of your identity and you can relate to the patient, and that helps guide the diagnosis and the care of that patient. But equally, for other patients, it might be that they feel more comfortable with a more professional approach and slightly less personally connected with the doctors and the team caring for them, and that's fine too. And I just wanted to say, on the professionalism side as well, I feel like as time's gone on through medicine, I feel like I've also been able to integrate more of my own identity into my medical self. But then I also feel like my medical self has positively influenced me outside of medicine as well, in the sense that before I started medicine, I wasn't a very confident speaker. I didn't have a lot of the skills that I feel like I've got from medicine that I can now obviously use when I'm on the ward and speaking to patients, but I can also use in other aspects of my life.
Mm.
As I was saying, we're both starting jobs in a few months, and I've been looking at places to rent, and I feel like I feel like when I go and see places and I'm talking to the estate agent and things like that, my professional side does come out, and I think that probably is a good thing, um, because I'm able to, you know, navigate those situations in a way that I probably wouldn't have been able to before I started medicine. So I think that I just wanted to make a case for professionalism and try and show that it's not all bad. I think you do eventually get to a place where there is a symbiosis between your medical self and yourself outside of medicine.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I mean, before I started medical school, I was also kind of like an introverted person. Not even kind of. I was an introverted person. I had just my friends and I stuck with them. And it was basically a baptism of fire. During medical school, I remember thinking to myself, I think this was the end of my third year or the start of fourth year, and in Kings, we have three stages: stage one, stage two, stage three. And stage three is basically about making you a doctor and preparing you for F1. And I remember thinking to myself at the start of stage three, I'm supposed to be the doctor that I'm shadowing. And I looked at them and they were confident in approaching the patient. They knew what they wanted to say. They weren't scared. I was with them from ward round all the way through to seeing the patient. So I know that, I mean, aside from getting into their head to see what they're thinking about, they didn't have any feelings of like trepidation before seeing a patient. And up until that point, every single patient that I saw on placement, I rehearsed the conversation time and time again in my head. That might also be my social anxiety talking, but that part of me, I had to basically tell to get with the program a little bit when I got into my fourth year. And the way I did this was literally just feeling the fear and diving for it regardless. All of my friends, literally all of the friends that I ended up making in my final years of medical school, they will tell anyone that I am always the first to put my hand up for anything. If it's sim, I'm the first to put my hand up. If we are taking histories, I'm the first to put my hand up. Like if we need to go do a procedure on a patient, I'm the first one to put my hand up. And I think it came from the realization that if I want to be this image of myself, I have to do the work to be that person. So, you came into medicine for a reason. You want to be a doctor. You have to create that image of the doctor you want to be and go after it, basically. I think it's safe in medical school, experimenting with your identity and how that lends itself to professionalism. You're not going to get sanctioned for it. You are encouraged, at least at King's, we're encouraged to trying to include our personality into our interactions with patients and to find our styles, like our consultation styles. I can't count the amount of times that I've heard you will figure out your consultation style in like a session, but we're encouraged to do that. And I think if your medical school is not encouraging you to do that, then I am saying and I am encouraging you to do that. That is what you're supposed to do. No two GPs are the same. No two anesthesists are the same. And we have the GMT guidelines as a guide, but everyone has individuality, and you just have to look back on your years of medical school and see all of the clinicians that you've ever seen. I've seen really eccentric, absurd people, and they're still professional. So I think professionalism helps, and I think it's not the be all and end all. I think it's something that we all have to navigate. I don't think there's an instruction manual to how to do it. I think the only instruction is just dive in and figure it out, and you'll be safe figuring it out in medical school.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Looking back, I think that medical school is definitely a good opportunity to explore how your personal identity and professional identity can coexist, and the way that you present yourself to patients and trying different consultation styles. And yeah, I'm the same. I've seen lots of different doctors who are really good doctors, but they're also very different, and they act very differently when they're talking to patients. They act differently when they're talking to other staff members. They're very different people, but they are still, at the end of the day, they are still very good doctors. Although it can feel like there is a pressure to act a certain way and become a certain person, I think, as we were kind of talking about before, I think that comes from the fact that medical education has to teach lots of people, and it can't be individualized to tell you personally how to be the best doctor that you can be. There's guidelines and there's guidance about the things you should be aiming for. But in order to, as you were saying, create the image of the doctor you want to be, you have to take those expectations and then also incorporate that with your own identity and your own approach. And then once those things are combined, then you can be similar to the successful individualistic doctors that you see on placement. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit already, but what kind of things do you do to stay connected to your personal identity outside of medicine, given some of the constraints around professionalism?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that we shouldn't put medicine in a box. And I think initially that's what I did to just try and get some piece of myself back. I just put it in a box. I attended uni from 9 to 5, and that was it. Um, and I only did sort of like the bare minimum for medicine. And I threw myself into every other thing outside of medicine. So I mentioned before that my interest was just like arts and like creativity. I studied textiles, photography, music in school. So I was like, how do I get this part of myself back? Luckily for me, I lived in London and I lived right next to UAL. So I was always around creative people, fashion designers, musicians, and I just went right in and I took the skills that medicine had taught me, developing rapport, speaking to different people. And like now in my personal life, like I have so many social interactions with loads of different people. I meet new people all the time. I work with new people all the time. So that was basically how I forced myself to do that. Also because I hadn't heard of anything to do with arts and medicine, and even when I spoke it out loud, it was kind of like a taboo to say like, "What do you mean you want to do something outside of medicine?" I remember speaking to so many people, and they'd give me like a side eye. Like, what do you mean you want to do something other than medicine? And I don't think it's bad to want to do something else. I think it's, even a talent, it's a gift that you've got interests and passions outside of medicine. You've got the bandwidth to support them all. It took me a while to actually arrive at that stance and outlook on it. So yeah, that's just what I did. I found a way that arts and medicine collided as well, and this was through speaking with some academics. I know at King's we have a massive like network of researchers and clinical professionals, and I just was signed up to every single newsletter possible. And I saw there was an opportunity that was dropped into my inbox, and this was called the King's Undergraduate Research Fellowship. And I found this in my first year, and it was basically the start of everything that I like to do now and want to do now. It was basically collaborating with different faculties. So you don't have to apply for a research fellowship within your faculty. And I thought that was the best thing because that encourages like interdisciplinary collaboration. And I love that King's championed that. So I actually did mine with the dental school, and they did theirs in arts-based research. So it was very multidisciplinary, and that was when I found out, like, I found the place that the two collide, and sometimes it's hard to find it. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. It does take a while to like reach out to people, and they signpost you to someone else, and then that person signposts you to someone. But I feel like eventually you will find the people that are doing what you want to do. And if you don't find them through your uni, then there's always LinkedIn, and there's always YouTube, or Google, or good old like word of mouth. But that's like how I managed to combine both things and also keep them a bit separate. But yeah, that's how I managed to do that.
Yeah, I think when you're first starting medicine, it's medicine is everything. There's nothing outside of medicine, and then you go through a period where I'm so over medicine. I just want to pass, and I want to do anything other than medicine
Yeah.
right now. And then I was initially going to say you go through those two phases and then you find a balance, but more realistically, you go through those phases probably 5 or 6 times, and then you find a balance. And in the future, I'll probably go through more phases where medicine's everything, and then I'm not really that interested in
Yeah.
medicine. I think because it's such a long career, it is important to allow yourself that time where you're not constantly focused on medicine and you are exploring other things. It was interesting what you were saying about King's having the collaboration between different disciplines. I remember at Imperial in one of our first few years, we did a collaboration with, I think it was Westminster University, where I think we worked with architecture students, and we had
Wow.
to collaborate to design spaces where healthcare could be provided. So, like, basically, it was like GP consultation rooms and GP waiting rooms, things like that. And I think there are definitely ways. It sounds a bit unusual saying that you can explore things outside of medicine within medicine, but I think because medicine is so far-reaching and it's so broad, you can definitely you
Yeah.
can definitely explore the things that you're interested in within medicine. And yeah, I think the other thing I would
Definitely.
say for me to the things that help me stay connected to my personal identity outside of medicine is actually just going home. So I'm not originally from London. I'm originally from, the north of England, and as you can probably hear. And I think that just going home and being around people who aren't in medicine and just trying to reflect on how I felt about medicine going into it as a medical student, and kind of what you were saying earlier about how you have this idea of the doctor that you're going to be and what your ambitions are before you start medicine. Just trying to reconnect with those and check in, and obviously the more you learn about medicine, you shape the doctor that you want to be, and that's fine. You don't have to be the same doctor that you wanted to be before you started medicine, but just checking in with what my initial ambitions were, and just trying to recapture that excitement of having an offer to get into medical school and thinking about how I'm going to be a doctor one day, and just trying to kind of to capture that and just make sure that I'm still enthusiastic about medicine, but I'm still in touch with those feelings I had before I started medicine.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where like reflections come in key. Um, I agree. Having friends outside of medicine is so important. I mean, having friends within is great as well, but having friends outside is so important. It grounds you. Like you said, like there are phases where you want absolutely nothing to do with your degree. And not just medicine. I don't want it to sound like we're berating medicine, but yeah, sometimes you just don't want anything to do with it, and that's okay. You can go through that phase, and you need people that are outside of that to help you bring you out. So I think my friends outside of medicine have been really helpful, and obviously finding people within medicine who also have other stuff outside to do if you can't find anyone outside, if you're like at a campus university or something. But yeah, I think reflection is just coming key to help you remember like who you are, who you want to be, how you're going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap things up. Um, Unless you have anything else you wanted to add.
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay. Um, well, thank you for coming on and sharing your story and your thoughts. Um, and yeah, all the best when you start your job.
Thank you for having me, and you too.
Thanks.
Please subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, Stories and Scrubs, and follow us on Instagram at storiesandscrubs.podcast to hear about upcoming episodes, and check out the description of this episode to find out how to share your story. Thanks for listening.